What's going on, y'all? Welcome to 8 Cubes. I'm KMBest, he's Lambie Series, and we're going to start this episode of 8 Cubes talking about Silver Sable, whose name I recently learned is actually in canon Silver Sablenova. Bravo to whoever came up with that one. You'd never guess that's her alter ego. Now, Silver Sable is a 1/1 with an ability that steals 2 power from the top card of your opponent's deck. This makes her a very clear fit in many bounce decks in place of cards like Rocket Raccoon and a bounce staple alongside the Hood and Nico Minoru as one of the generally accepted best cards to have in your deck and bounce. I think the real question for her is whether or not she's just good even outside of bounce. Lambie, where are you at on her in bounce and her outside of bounce?
Okay, so we cannot actually not talk about Silver Sable without saying the fact that she's just okay. We have to mention the bounce thing
We
first
can't
for
not.
sure.
Yeah, no, we can't
Yeah, we
not. Yeah,
cannot.
we can't not.
She's too good in bounce. I played her a little bit earlier today, and then I was like, firstly, I'm just very happy that we get to play Falcon again, right? For a period, Falcon wasn't really in all the bounce decks. Now with Silver Sable, you get an actual powerhouse that works really well with Falcon. So yeah, I was really sure that this card was gonna go well in bounce, and after testing, yes, it's insane in bounce. Like on average, right? Like I wanna say 1/5, but I've done the 1/7 Silver Sable a couple of times, and which means that she's actually a 1/13 because she kind of like reduces 3 cards from your opponent's side of the board, opponent's deck, right? Yeah, so she's just naturally a very powerhouse fit in this deck. I would say like easier to use Rocket Raccoon for sure, and also probably better in general, right? Outside of bounce, honestly, I haven't actually tried the card outside of bounce because it didn't really feel like you'd want to play there's so many 1-drops you can play that doesn't need to be bounced, right? Like this one feels like clearly wants to be bounced. So I haven't actually practiced much with this card like outside of bounce shells yet. But I do think that this card can actually just be it can just be a 1-cost card if you really want to play a 1-cost card in whatever deck you want to play, to be honest.
Yeah, and so like when you want to play a 1-cost card in whatever deck you want to play, right? I think the deck that once just like I would like a generic 1-cost card that came to mind for me was Wixie, where it's like previously you'd be playing Spider Ham or whatever. And it's like I actually do think like, yeah, Spider Ham will get rid of something forever, and like if it's a meaningful ability, it's a really good thing. But also, it has 2 less power on base than this card, and like that is actually weirdly something that does matter. Like, I'm not saying like, oh, always do this, but I will say that like I played Silver Sable in the deck, and I didn't feel like I missed Spider Ham at all. And that's a deck that like there are other builds of Wiccan that like, you know, you can play the Hood in there because you're playing Viper, but if you're playing Wixie, the reason you're doing it is to get Mobius and Pixie in there. You want to be doing that because you want to get good value out of your Mobius. And if that's what you're trying to do, you need 1-drops that are just like standalone. You can't be doing all this combo stuff. You need standalone good 1-drops, and she is just flat out a standalone good 1-drop. I think, you know, in that context, it's possible like you could there's like a sort of spectrum of utility 1-drop to power 1-drop where the 3 options for that slot are something like, you know, Silver Sable, who's in the middle, Hydra Bob, who's on the far side of power, and Spider Ham, who's on the far side of utility. And I think basically any of those is like a fine decision, but I have enjoyed playing Silver Sable there too. And I think that's a real question for her future. The other real question for her future, we'll probably cover this when we talk about Madam Webb, is does normal bounce survive in a world where move bounce is the best bounce deck? And does she make it into that deck?
Yeah, I want to add one more thing, which is like I like how you mentioned that like you don't feel like you missed Spider Ham at all in the in like the Wixie deck, right? Which is a super big shout out to the fact that in this game of Marvel Snap, stats is really like the supreme, you know.
Yeah.
Like even though Spider Ham has the utility of like disrupting your opponent's like strategy in their hand, right? But like just because Silver Sable's like at minimum like a 1/3/1/5, you know, you feel like it's very easy for it to replace Spider Ham, you know. So stats is really supreme.
Like it has 3 times the power.
Exactly.
It has actually 3 times the power. That's a really big thing to have. Now on to Symbiote Spiderman, who is a card that I feel like people have just not even scratched the surface of. There's a ton of weird stuff you can do with him. The most successful things that I've seen with him are the like stats vomit Noki style decks where you're like Gwenpool SSMing or like Sage SSMing or things of that nature where you're just like doing something that's very strong but not very expensive, so you don't have to go out of your way super hard. I've seen him played in bounce decks. I've seen him played in Wong decks. The other really successful use of him that I've seen is in Phoenix Force decks, where he's just Shuri too, which is just really all you want out of a card like that, because Now you have your Phoenix Force combo line, your Shuri combo line, and your Symbiote Spider-Man combo line. That deck even basically had a free spot. It was playing Iron Lad. Now it can play Symbiote Spider-Man just better most of the time whenever you're doing anything you want to do. And so it gives you this additional line in Phoenix Force. And outside of that, it feels like people are struggling to figure out where it would be better than a replacement, but it's such a weird and unique card that it's like, I don't know if we've really scratched the surface of this one, but it's also like, I don't know if it's worth scratching the surface of this, right? Like, it could just be 4/6 Grandmaster. We might not actually know, but it could also be something that is genuinely worth investigating in a lot of different spots until we figure out exactly where it does go.
Yeah. Once again, we mentioned, like you said, I was about to bring this up as well. 4/6 Grandmaster. Like at the end of the day, like the fact that we are even scratching this surface right now is because it's a 4/6. Honestly,
Yes.
like the fact that it's a 4/6 has allowed it to be present in many spots, even suboptimally, right? The Phoenix Force one makes a lot of sense to me personally. Like I think it's just like easy to see the utility there. Plus, you mentioned there's already a free slot in the deck anyway, so it's like an easy combo backed by the fact that it's a 4/6. But then the interesting one is when you mentioned that like it's also seeing play in like more like mid-rangey stats based like that decks as well, right? Because I feel like that's only very possible for you to do with a card like this if like the fact that it's a 4/6, right? Like even if you don't get the maximum output out of this card in like your normal stats deck, right? It's a 4/6, you know. So I feel like yes, I 100% agree that we haven't really even scratched like the full potential of this card yet. If there is more relevant potential for it to be like, you know, discovered and all that. But like I feel like at the baseline, this 4/6 stat line allows you to be like a bit less you get less punished for experimenting with this card at the current point in time, because like even in the worst case scenarios, it's actually just a playable card that gives you the option to click a button.
Yes.
Activate.
Like it's not that much worse than whatever you'd be replacing it with, even if it is worse, which allows for it to be in more decks as people experiment with it. Like 4/6 isn't the greatest stat line on earth, but it's not going to lose you the game the way a 2/0 will. Guys, gals, and non-binary pals, I think it's time for a moment of silence. If you would please bow your heads in memory of Loki and take about 10 seconds for me. Thank you very much. I would appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, we are gathered here today in order to mourn, to grieve, and maybe to celebrate the death of Loki, which for sure will take this time. For sure. Turns out 2/2 Loki is actually just terrible. I'm at the point where I'm not even sure it's good in Arishem anymore, and that is horrifying. I'm at the point where I'm cutting Cassandra Nova from a lot of decks because I just don't respect Arishem, and it's like, look, if you need the help to beat Arishem at this point, that's on you. And it could only be played in an Arishem deck. I'm gonna be honest with you, everybody. I think they finally did it. I think they finally got to a Loki formulation where if you want to do the thing that Loki says on it, you can play it in Arishem and still get the thing you want out of it. But if you are no longer just going to be like having to consider Loki in every deck you ever make. That, I think, is a really big deal.
Yeah, I think finally Second Dinner finally did the successful thing, right, in actually making Loki a bit unplayable. Not a bit, kind of really unplayable, you know. Like for a year, Loki has been going through like at least 4 different variations of nerfs already, I believe. And then like finally now it hit the sweet spot whereby it's so bad to the point that you never want to play it. Like the Arishem argument is really interesting because I feel like we mentioned bounce a bit earlier, right? Silver Sable bounce, and also in the future, like maybe move bounce with Madam Web and stuff like that. I don't think Arishem even ever keeps out on points anymore. Like firstly, you don't have the Loki to like the previous Loki was 3/5 draw a card, right? So you kind of like have stats, plus you get to like discount stuff from the deck and all that kind of thing. But now the 2/2 Loki is just very horrible because it doesn't really draw cards at all, and also like it's way lower on stats. And in general, I do think that like Arishem can't really compete on points with all these up and coming decks. Even the one right now is the Silver Sable bounce, right? Just this deck, I think it's like so much more points than what Arishem can do. And also I do think that like because of that, Cassandra being cut from decks is very interesting because now it opens up a space in many decks, you know, like the mid-range decks used to always have Cassandra just because it had to. Now you open up a space, right? And like that 3-cost slot, which we'll talk about later, has so many options that you can like fit stuff into. So yeah, I'm very happy with this change. I do think that, okay, personally I'm a bit upset that like Arishem is a bit worse right now because I do like that style of gameplay. But I guess as a whole, with Loki being out of the picture, I do think people will be overall celebratory and rejoicing a little bit more.
Yeah, I think that what's confused people about Loki and how Loki has been treated by Second Dinner for so long is why do they feel the need to keep this guy good, but they're fine dunking Leech into the Shadow Realm, right? Like, people
Yeah.
look at Loki and Leech as like similarly unfun cards. They're fine dunking Leech into the Shadow Realm, but for some reason they just always kept Loki around. And I feel like, I don't know. I feel like it's maybe time for Loki to have a few months off. They did it to Thanos, they did it to Leech, they've done it to plenty of Professor X is a great example. Like, it might just be time for Loki to have a few months off. And then if they need to buff him again, they can, I don't know, try bringing him back to 3-5, but not putting the draw on him or whatever, right? Like, I don't exactly know, but I do feel that like maybe it's meaningfully making the game a more fun place to exist in. Maybe it is.
Have you ever considered that maybe it's because they never thought that Loki needed this big of a nerf, Like I felt like they've been doing like very baby step stuff,
Yeah.
like gradually chipping a little bit off, chipping a little bit off. But I feel like maybe they underlooked the fact that like this was needed all along, because like every prior Loki nerf just felt like it was never enough. And I'm not sure if they realized that it was never enough until like now.
I think the fact that this nerf was so successful has made me reevaluate what I thought Loki was. And I hope people
Mm,
are also able to do this because a lot of people look at Loki and say, oh, it's energy cheating. That's broken. This is a 2-drop that makes your whole deck cheaper. The thing that made Loki strong wasn't energy cheating per se, it was
hmm.
card advantage. It was that you would
Yes.
turn your hand of dog shit, which is fuller than a normal hand, into good cards. It is that you would play a 3-5 that drew you good cards and you could also play your own cards, right?
Yeah,
That's
three
what
five, yeah.
made Loki good. In both of his other forms, what was actually happening was you were leveraging. Like, this is why, for example, there was so much like, oh, well, Loki always fills the board up. This is why there was so much overlap with Elsa. It was about volume, it was about card volume. And yes, energy cheat definitely mattered a lot for making the cards that you got good. It's a tale of two things. But what happened with this nerf is they took one of those things away. This is no longer a card advantage engine in any form anymore. And it turns out everyone was focused on the wrong thing. Everyone was focused on the energy cheat. It sucks. It's not worth it.
This is so crazy because we spent a bit of time talking about three separate and completely different topics, right? But at the end of the day, my overarching thing that I'm taking away from this, which I probably already knew for a long time, and hopefully you guys start to realize as well, is the numbers on the cards probably matter the most about it,
It's
about
really
over
important.
anything. Like honestly, okay, I'm not saying that the cards text doesn't matter, but like we spent time talking about three different topics, and it's all about at the end of the day, it's right, the numbers on the cards, right? If they are big enough, it actually is fine to do a lot of different things.
Mm-hmm. Like, the numbers on the cards in this game, like, Marvel Snap is really simple.
They
Both
matter so
players
much, dude.
play, and then whoever has the biggest numbers win. Numbers are
Exactly.
important. So, with that, Cassandra Nova, Loki, both sort of taking a dive in power and both being like, basically, you had to run these threes in the previous meta, there is now just a wide swath of 3-drops. I'm going to try to name them all. I probably won't be able to, that you can reasonably play in decks or that I play against commonly. So let's start with the first one would be Copycat. You can still play Cassandra Nova. You can play I've seen a lot more Cosmo recently. Red Guardian is still a card. Nocturne is
Ooh.
still a card. Speed is an excellent option. There's just so many good three
Juggernaut.
drops. Juggernaut, yes. And all of them fill totally different roles. There's like generic stat stick or utility stat stick, right? Like speed is the generic stat stick. You can replace that with Gladiator if you don't have speed, or you can replace it with a utility stat stick in the form of Copycat, or you can get more utility and less stats in the form of Nocturne, or you can get a different kind of utility with Red Guardian. There's so many different options on the three, ranging all over the board, teching against all sorts of different stuff, from the budget Eliaths of Cosmo and Juggernaut to the good curve out plays of Copycat and Cassandra Nova. They're like, there is so much great diversity at 3, and I never really thought I would say this. I used to say this about 4, about how great 4 design was. But right now, I feel like the design at 3, there are so many different playable and good 3-drops. And I just feel like it's worth pointing out that there are Like there are usually only like 2 or 3 slots in a deck for those, and picking the right 2 or 3 could be make or break.
Yeah, throwing this back to deck construction and also like surprise factor as well. Like on ladder, I don't think I need to specifically talk about like what 3-drop is the best right now, because actually I don't even think either of us know exactly what the best 3-drop is right now, right? It's all up in the air, which is the great part, right? Experimentation is super important. But I think with this amount of flexibility in the 3 slot right now, which, and the thing is all these trees do very drastically different things, right? Like you mentioned. I do think that ladder is gonna be really interesting because, like, it's all about surprise factor, right? Like if your 3-drop is not the most commonly played 3-drop, and then you play it in your deck, it's gonna win you 8 cubes so many times, right? Because, like, let's just say to a certain extent, people start to expect juggernauts and stuff, but yours isn't a jug, yours is actually a Cosmo. So like in that slot, you're just gonna steal 8 cubes from the people that expect the jug, or like expect the speed, or expect the copycat or whatever. It's just very different right now, and I feel like with the amount of diversity that you can have in the 3 slot right now, which all drastically does different things, I do think that it's gonna be a very exciting time for people that are willing to experiment.
Next up, normally we wait until Mondays to talk about new cards, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we can wait until Monday. We're just going to be talking about this card a lot. Madam Web is one of the scariest cards they've ever made. I'm very terrified of what move bounce can do. And I think a lot of people look at that and they see, oh, it's 2-1. What the hell are you talking about, KM? You're overreacting. We have ways to handle move bounce. And I think we do have ways to handle move bounce. I have no doubt that something like, Sarah Tech with Invisible Woman Killmonger, or like Invisible Woman Shang Chi Grandmaster, even. Like, there are things you can do to beat this deck, but it's just like they're kind of pretty specific, right? Meanwhile, this deck has like very powerful scaling threats in the form of Human Torch. I do think that the Taskmaster nerf might be the only thing that holds this deck back from being something truly ridiculous. But right now, like Madam Web, every move card, Human Torch, Dagger, and Vulture, the main ones, is built on the theory that you have to spend both a card and then the energy to use that card. So not only the slot in your deck, but also you're doing something inefficient in order to get a big return, right? If you're Doctor Stranging something, you're getting a return commensurate with that investment. The issue is Doctor Strange can be used once. Madam Web can be used up to 4 times. If you play a 1-drop with Human Torch on 1 and you move stuff out of there every time, you will go crazy with those numbers. There is some real number game stuff that you can accomplish here. And that's just a very scary proposition to me. To put the metagame in a position where people are unironically doing Invisible Woman Shang, that seems horrifying. That's not a good thing. It's not something I want. So I'm sort of going to open the floor here to the comments and to Lambie. What are we supposed to do in a world where this deck is actually just putting a million points on the board? Are we playing like Sarah, Shang type stuff? Are we just saying, I'm going to final turn Shang-Chi Killmonger you? Is that what's happening here? Shang-Chi Shadow King, and then, we get farmed by every deck playing Eliath because we can only beat the move bounce decks, and then the move bounce decks farm those decks because they just don't play enough face-up interaction? Like, is that where this is going to go?
Okay, so the funny thing is we talk so much about stats, right? This card is obviously not a stats card. Like, look at her herself, she's a 2-1, but what she does is she creates so much stats. Like, she's the enabler of so many things. Like, she's one of the best enablers I think this game has ever printed, because the text literally says ongoing, you can move one of your other cards away from here each turn. So the you can part, firstly, you can move. This is insane because you can also not move, so there's also mind games right out there, right? Like, let's just say you have like a torch on the board that's like 16 power. 16 is insane, right? Do I really need to move it into to another location to make it 32? I might, and then I win a location, or I might not and leave it here as a 16 and you still lose. So I feel like the fact that Madam Web gives you the option to move once per turn, like whatever, you can be moving something irrelevant to another location just to win the location with a minimal amount of stats, right? You don't have to move your 16 power torch. This ability to create big stats and have flexibility of reallocating said stats or not reallocating said stats is, I think, one of the reasons why she's like super powerful. Also, she's only 2 costs. It's very easy to fit her into curves. So I do think there's gonna be a lot of guesswork going around. I feel like many games, like in Conquest on ladder, 8 cubers by the way, will go down to, are they gonna shift? So do I put my card here? Are they not gonna shift? So do I put my card there? It's gonna be very mind-boggling, very scary, exciting obviously. So I do think that this card will definitely make waves, and I wouldn't say it creates a new deck, right? Like there's been move bounce and like movement related stuff in the game for the longest time ever already. But it will open up a new dimension of like your actual guesswork will define your climb very often. And some people might hate that, some people might
I
not.
hate that.
I know you hate that.
I hate
Yeah, yeah.
that.
I know. Yeah, yeah. Some people hate the 50-50s, maybe some 51-49s, I don't know, but it's gonna happen, right? A lot of games are gonna be won or lost based on whether Madam Web moves the thing you think is gonna move or not.
Expect to see a lot of the Galactus snipe shield on my screen. In 50-50 metas, it's way more important than ever to put that guy up.
Yeah.
So, I wanted to talk about the main ways of saying no in this meta. We've had a lot of metagames that have been defined by saying no. Professor X metagames, Leech metagames, Darkhawk
Live.
metagames, Alioth metagames. And I think we're going to specifically talk about Alioth and Shang a little bit later. I want to talk about the less traditional ways of saying no. The small clog package and the card Sandman. And the small clog package here I'm defining as White Widow, Kate Bishop, shout out to Acid Arrow, and like Hood Viper, basically. And then Sandman is just the card Sandman partnered with like a 6-drop, right? Like you kind of know what that
Yeah.
one is. And I think both of those are really interesting case studies because I find them personally to be much less, I guess, to use a, for lack of a better term, evil than any of the other ones. Like I find them far preferable to when Arishem was playing Darkhawk Leech. I find them far preferable to Profex Cannonball. I find them far preferable to all of that stuff. I guess my question is, where is the line? Is the line exactly here? Are they above that line or below that line? Are they going to deal with Sandman and Clog? Is that a thing they're going to want to do? What would you do in that situation? Like, where is the line for how fine it is to have all these cards that just say, sorry, dude, you can't play cards anymore? Like, where's the line for that? And I genuinely don't know where it is. And I think Sandman and Clog are two really interesting case studies on what the devs think is okay and is not okay.
I actually think I kind of know where this is. I know where the my allegiances lie, or like my point here is, because I feel like, okay, let's look at Professor X and Professor X specifically first, right? And yeah, Professor X. Professor X in its original form literally said you cannot play in that location, right? Like I think that's a very big difference between like I can play something even though it's restricted and I cannot play anything, you know. Like in terms of a feels okay perspective, right? I feel okay playing against Sandman because I can play one big card. I feel okay playing against Clock because I can play one card even if it clogs up my location after I play that one card. With Professor X back then, you cannot play anything at all. So I feel like the line is about, when it comes to this kind of floodgates or like say no cards, I feel like the say no cards cannot say no to the entirety of the play, you know. It can
Yeah.
say no to like maybe like most things, but if as long as you can still do something and you have a chance to win after doing something, I think the say no cards are fine. Like with Sandman, obviously you only get to play one card on the final turn, but one card on the final turn is a lot of stuff, right? It's a Red Hawk, it's a Doom, it's Ultron. Like there's one card that actually gives you a chance despite getting Sandman, you know. With Professor X, I guess for that location, my argument is that it's just gone. The location is just gone. You can't ever contest it ever again. So I feel like this is not so much of like a right or wrong answer. It's more like a feeling kind of thing. Like
Yeah.
it feels less bad to get hit by a Sandman or Clock, because as long as like you can play one card, you know, it's not like kind of over. With Professor X, it was always just Jeff or die,
Yeah.
you know.
I'm not disagreeing that it's better, right? Like these
It's
are
just a
definitely
feeling. It's just a feeling thing.
right.
Yeah.
I'm not disagreeing, but like, where is the line exactly for these kind of cards? I think Sandman is probably
Mm.
below that line. I could be wrong, but like I think Sandman is probably below that line, and personally, to me, I think Clog is probably above that line.
Why is
And
Clock above that line though? Why do you
same as
think so?
Professor X. Like it's just the same thing.
Mm.
Like when I go White Widow Acid Arrow in that lane where you played 2 cards, like what are you supposed to do about that? Like, sorry,
Okay,
it's
true,
turn
true,
4,
true,
you're done. Like your fault for
true,
playing
true.
cards, idiot. Like it's just I don't
Okay, I
know.
get it. I get it. I guess Clock is a bit closer towards the prof thing, which is like it's more likely your opponent cannot play cards than
Yeah.
Sandman, right? Because Sandman literally says play one card, but you are still playing a card. Whereas for like that
Yes.
whole like where is it, Goblin Titania or like Acid Arrow,
Yeah,
whatever
Goblin
scenario.
Titania, Acid Arrow,
Yeah,
and the White Widow. Like there's just a lot.
true.
So I wanted to talk about the Alioth Shang dynamic. Shang Chi is at roughly an all-time low right now because Alioth is at roughly an all-time high. Alioth is the guaranteed finisher in every single Wiccan deck. And Wiccan is sort of the backbone of most mid-range decks, and it has sort of
Mhm.
formed that around what if it is redefined what mid-range is, right? Like we have gone into where Wiccan is like the good cards archetype. That's what you're doing. And instead of playing Shang-Chi, decks like this are playing Alioth because it covers a bunch of different things, which means in turn those decks have ended up vulnerable to like Armor Cosmo, Sasquatch Mockingbird, Scar decks, where you end up in situations that are just very, very bad or unprofitable to Alioth into. And that in turn should likely give rise to more Shang-Chi decks, which then get hosed by the Alioth decks, etc., 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 right? And so you end up in like a fairly interesting spot right here. And so what I wanted to ask you, Lambie, is if you're building a deck, just like a mid-range deck right now, are you team Shang or are you team Alioth?
Personally, okay, so personally, I'm someone that I feel I lean more towards like flexibility in the sense that like my final turn is not just one card. So I'm generally leaning more towards Shank simply because like of the dynamic where I can Shank plus something like Shank plus X, that kind of thing. X being like whatever card I want to play in another location, right? So just based on deck building, I'm normally more of a Shank gamer. And I also do think Shank might see a resurgence simply because like we're playing a lot of bigger raw points right now,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, okay, not just Shang, but like when it comes to like move bounce or like bounce in general, Shadow King as well is like one of those cards. Like that's cheap and just neuters all the points, you know. Like I like the fact that Alioth is like one card just say no right on the final turn. But the thing is it's 6 mana. Like you know you're gonna get hit by Alioth, and then like you can maybe 50-50 and play cards in other locations or something like that, you know, that kind of thing. So I feel like Shang has a bit more flexibility whereby you can like just like split up your power on the final turn. And yeah, so I'm leaning more towards Shang. And like I said, like stats is everything right now. And Shang just completely annihilates and gets rid of stats, right? Alioth, you still have to make like a bit of a, how should I put it? Like you have to kind of choose and hope that they play cards in that spot.
I think I'm Team Alioth right now. And while I
Okay.
don't disagree with your assessment of like, oh, it's one card on the final turn, here's the thing that Alioth does that Shang doesn't. Alioth covers you versus everyone trying something weird. Alioth is your catch-all against like, oh, they're wonging me. No, they're not. No, they're not. They're not doing that. Oh, they're playing Living Tribunal. They're not doing that either. Like, what? Oh, I'm gonna get Mr. Negative. No, I'm not. I'm not actually doing that. And because of Wiccan, you are not limited to just Alioth on the final turn of the game now. It's like
True.
Alioth, grapple arrow, Pim arrow, and suddenly you're like
True.
10 power Alioth, and then also like 7 power of arrows or whatever the hell else you're doing, right? A Kitty Pride that you've been scaling all game, Athena proc or whatever, right? Like it's not just Alioth on the final turn of the game, and I think that
Mm.
is a valuable asset to the card right now.
Yeah, I do think you're right though. I still prefer Shank, but
Mhm.
like I get what you mean by Alioth is I guess a little bit more flexible than it
Yeah.
used to be, right? Because of the simple fact that I guess it requires a bit more setup, but your deck is kind of just built to set it up anyway if you're playing Wiccan. So yeah, if you get the Wiccan off, I would say Alioth is like probably the more feels good card to play in that situation. Also a bit more feels bad for your opponent, you know, because they kind of know that it's not just gonna be just Alioth. But yeah, we'll see how things unfold. I do think Shang will see a resurgence simply because Madam Web really is really good at making a lot of big numbers. Yeah.
Mhm. Lastly, I wanted to talk a little bit about Darkhawk, a card that has been alternately like one of the best cards in the game, one of the worst cards in the game. And I wanted to talk about why it is he's not everywhere right now. His one real home is the Goon Knight deck, where your whole goal is to attack the hand, attack the deck, attack everything but the actual cards on the board. And that strategy actually I think is very, very strong unless your opponent is able to immediately recognize what's going on. And then it's like, oh, this deck doesn't actually play points. This deck doesn't actually play points, and they don't actually play tech. And so if I can just like put cards on the board, I'm going to beat them. And Darkhawk is the only real points threat in that deck. It's going to be like 13, 15 sometimes, depending on how you set it up. And that is just a fascinating dynamic to me for a card that was once a generic 5-drop option. it has been supplanted as generic 5-drop option in so many decks because of Ajax, because Ajax doesn't have the same Shang Chi vulnerability, because Ajax can get taller off of a hazmat. And it's just weird to look at Darkhawk and be like, yeah, you're limited to a deck that specifically wants the rocks in it. And I think I think I can tell you the reason for it. And the reason is that Rock Slide is a 3/3. That's why. It's hard to play that. We just listed every good 3-drop in the game a couple topics ago.
We didn't list Rock Slide.
We did not list Rock Slide. He is a 3/3. He is a 3/3 that is not Juggernaut or Cosmo. Like, that is bad. If Rock Slide was like a 3/5, I think we'd see a ton of Darkhawk. If Rock Slide even was a 3/4, we might be able to see it. But 3/3, you are giving up so much. You play a Rock Slide, they play a Copycat, and you're just like, man, if they don't draw those rocks, I got owned in that exchange.
Yeah, it's so crazy, right? Like the fact that Rock Slide is not even mentioned and Juggernaut was mentioned just really just means that, like, if there's no immediate board impact, the card is potentially not great enough and obsolete, you know. And obviously the biggest enabler for Darkhawk was the Rock Slide, right? Because Rock Slide was the one to give it a +4. But the fact that Rock Slide itself doesn't show any immediate impact also puts it a bit down and like less in favor than compared to other 3-drops. So yeah, that's probably one of the biggest reasons why Darkhawk isn't like widely just played as a deck, you know, because the enablers and the build up for the Darkhawk package is too low impact on the board, you know. So I don't think we're gonna see any resurgence of Darkhawk anytime soon. Also because RHM is like kind of gone, right? Even if you want to find a secondary use case to play a Darkhawk deck, like there's no RHM decks really to let you just like randomly win nowadays anymore. So yeah, commiserations to Darkhawk, I guess. But like honestly, this one I don't feel people will really miss. Like, people don't really miss Dark. I wouldn't say they would really miss Darkhawk not being in the game, you know, because I don't think it's never really been like that oppressive force in its like 5-cost form, right? The last time it was actually an oppressive force, I think it was during its 4-cost era.
All right, and on that bombshell, it's time to end. I have been KMBest. He has been Lambie Series. You have been phenomenal. Lambie, take us out of here.
Thank you so much for being here, guys. I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care, like, comment, subscribe. I'll see you guys real soon. Bye-bye.